Thank you for tuning in to the best parenting show on the internet, Post Daily Dose.
Is the Post. Is the Post. Is the Post. The Post Daily Dose. Is the Post. Is the Post. Is the Post. The Post Daily Dose. Is the Post. Is the Post.
How about a round of applause for all you foster, adoptive, and kinship parents? Glad to be here with you all today to kick off this month. Got some good information for you. I'm going to try to keep everything as simple as I possibly can because that's the way I like to teach it, because that's the way I like to live my life. I'm going to give you some really core concepts because I want to help you see something differently that perhaps you haven't seen before. I want to help you be able to walk out of here today when you go back to your children, and I want to be able to help you see them differently. And I want to be able to help you get on a path to healing their brains and healing their hearts that maybe you haven't been on before. And so that's why the title of this talk, not only is it the science of love and parenting, because you probably didn't know there was a science to love, but there is. And that's what changes everything. So when we know that there's a science to love, it becomes a game changer. But it's even more than that. It's understanding the new paradigm for parenting traumatized children. And a paradigm is the way in which you see the world. It's the lens that you look through. So everything changes from this new paradigm. You guys can follow me on Facebook. I'm streaming. I'm at Post+Institute on Facebook. Every day, 5 days a week, I do a show. I call it the greatest little parenting show on the planet. It's called Post Daily Dose. You can check me out there. So we're going to talk about seeing through a trauma lens. This is the new paradigm to parenting traumatized children. The first thing you have to understand is that all of your children have experienced trauma. They're all traumatized. The second thing you have to understand is that probably every single one of us in this room has experienced trauma. We're all traumatized. So if you don't understand that, if you don't get that right from the beginning, then we're already going down the wrong path. So you have to understand what trauma is. And we don't do a very good job in our society, in our professions, of helping people really understand what that means. And so I like to keep it, again, very simple. Trauma is defined as any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. Now think about that. Think about that in the context of your life. Because your paradigm doesn't change from me telling you about children. Your paradigm changes by you understanding yourself. When you understand yourself differently, you understand everyone else differently. That which you can see in yourself, you can more readily see in others. That which you cannot see in yourself, you can't see in others. And that really changed for me when I was about 27. And I was already traveling around the world at that time, lecturing and talking about attachment, and talking about, not a lot about stress, which I'm going to talk about exclusively now. But talking about attachment, talking about working with divine children and prompt behaviors and things like that. But when I was 27, I was having an email exchange with one of my patients. And she said, "Well, Brian, what are you afraid of?" And I'm telling you, I was about to bear the S on my chest. I was unbuttoning my shirt. I could see the red starting to show up. And all of a sudden, it's like God just tapped me on the head. And God taps me on the head quite a bit. I'm pretty hard-headed. It's like God tapped me on the head, and I had an experience that made me realize that I was afraid of everything. I was about to let her know I wasn't afraid of anything. And the exact opposite was the truth. I was afraid of everything. And I had been afraid my entire life. I was adopted. So my fear started in utero. When my biological mother was 7 months pregnant with me, she knew she wasn't going to be able to keep me. So she had to try to forget that I was even in her belly. That's when it set in. And it did not pick up. It did not lift. And it has not lifted. To be absolutely honest with you, I'm probably one of the most sensitive people you'll ever meet, fundamentally because I understand that I'm sensitive. Because of my experiences, the way my brain is wired, the way my brain is shaped from my earliest experiences, makes me highly fearful and stress sensitive. And that's what I want to help you understand, not only about your children, but also about yourself. So I realized in that moment that I was afraid of everything, and as soon as I realized that, my life changed. My professional and my personal life changed. I started seeing fear everywhere. I started seeing fear all the way through my childhood. I started seeing all the anxiety all the way through my childhood, all the behaviors that I was struggling with as a kid. I started seeing how those all lined up to my stress and my fear. And so it becomes imperative. It's not important. It is imperative that you understand the impact of stress and trauma in your life. Trauma is any stressful event which has been prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. And when you don't have an opportunity to talk about it, to cry about it, talk about it some more, cry about it some more, and then understand it. Now think about this. You've experienced a potentially traumatic experience in your life. Let's say when you were 5. Let's say when you were in utero. When you were in utero, because we know that as early as the 4th week after conception, now I'm talking to you as adults. I'm talking to you as adults. I want you to think about your birth. I want you to think about when you were in your mom's tummy. Not when your foster kid or your adopted kid or your niece or nephew or grandchild was in their mommy's tummy. I want you to think about when you were in your mommy's tummy. As early as the 4th week after conception, the fetus can hear. As early as the 2nd trimester, the fetus can think. So what was going on with mom when she was pregnant with you? What was going on with dad? What were their circumstances? What was their life like? Because you experienced all of the love and you experienced all the stress. And it began the shaping of your brain. And that shaping influences you to this day. There's research that says some adults in times of stress have the ability to revert to infancy. How many of you wives in here have said to your husband, would you stop acting like a baby? You don't raise your hand. I didn't say raise your hand. No. I'm trying to start a little drama up in here. Remember, Rick said act your age, not your shoe size. Right? But see, what research tells us is that is a biological reality. Now think about that. Your grown-ass husband is acting like a baby, and you are like, what is wrong with you? You are acting like just like our 2-year-old. That is a biological reality because when you stress, you regress. When you stress, you regress. When you're acting out, it's because you are stressed out, which is because you are regressed. Now think about this, because I'm going to take this down the rabbit hole a little bit. Because when you are acting out, it's because you are stressed out, because you are regressed. And when you regress, guess where you go to? You go to this area in your brain called your brain stem. Guess what the brain stem holds? It holds every memory you've ever had. Your brain stem holds every memory you've ever had. Now, those memories don't just get stirred up day to day. Hanging out this morning, for some of you it does, because there's some things that stress us different than other things. See, you can experience a traumatic reaction through any of your sensory pathways. What you see, what you hear, what you touch, what you taste, what you smell, the temperature of your body, movement, and digestion. They can all cause you to have a traumatic reaction. So there's somebody in here this morning, but that crowd in the hallway earlier was stressful as hell. They're like, oh, Lord, just let me go back, Steve. And they probably don't even know why. They just know crowds stress them out. They don't know why. They don't know why because it started probably at 5. It started probably at 3. It started probably in utero. You never know. Sometimes you do, but we definitely don't know if we don't ever ask, if we don't ever think about it. I had a lady at one of my conferences once. I was doing a conference at a substance abuse national conference in Louisiana, and I talked about if that stress experience doesn't have an opportunity to be expressed, processed, and understood, that's the difference between a short-term stressful event and a lifelong, possibly life-altering traumatic event. That potential stressful event becomes lifelong and possibly life-altering if you don't have an opportunity to express, process, and understand. So it can impact you for the rest of your life. John Bowlby said, the first 3 years of our lives establish the blueprints for all of our future relationships. That goes all the way back from conception now. Well, John Bowlby didn't realize that then, but science tells us now it starts at conception. And it goes all the way up to 5 years old. 5 years old, by the time you're 5 years old, your brain is 90% developed. 90%. 90 to 93%. By the time you're 5. So she heard me talking about that. She came up to me at the break and she said, oh my gosh, I have always been terrified of birds. Some grown woman in the helping profession. She was a social worker. I've always been terrified by birds. She said, just the other day, I was getting ready for work. I went and got in my car, and a bird flew down on the hood of my car. And she said, I froze. I could not move. She said, I begged that bird, please get off my car. She said, finally the bird flew off my car and I was able to drive to work. She said, I just now remembered when I was 5 years old, I was in the backyard with my sister. And we had a mean chicken back there. And he attacked us. And there was feathers going everywhere. And she said, ever since then, I have been terrified by birds. Yeah. She had never had the opportunity to express, process, and understand. She didn't remember. It's because that's unconscious. That's in your brainstem. So you start misbehaving, you start acting like an infant. You don't know why. You just know you feel really stressed out and really angry, and you just want a nipple. You just want to feel better. But you don't know why. It's a biological reality. When you stress, you regress. When you stress, you regress. So if that is a biological reality for adults, I'm still talking about us as adults. Imagine how much more so it is for our kids. Imagine how much more so it is for our foster and adoptive and kinship children. Who many of them, you have a good idea of what they come from. You don't know exactly what they come from because you've not walked in their shoes. You may not, if you've got a partner or a spouse or a best friend, you may not know all the things that your partner, your spouse, or your best friend have gone through. There are things that we experience in life that shape our realities. And the reason this is important, the reason it is imperative, is because the children you are raising have all been traumatized, which makes them stress sensitive and fearful. It's very simple. It's very simple. They are stress sensitive and they are fearful. Big groups, a lot of stress. Hunger, stress. Temperature fluctuations, stress. Classroom, stress. Getting in the car, stress. Going to bed, stress. Waking up, stress. Going to the dinner table, stress. Playing with friends, stress. Doing homework, stress. Taking a bath, stress. Brushing teeth, stress. They are sensitive to everything. Some things just trigger them more than others. When they are acting out, it's because they are stressed out, which is because they are regressed. If you regress right along with them, then you got 2 2-year-olds going after it. That is so important. It is so important because they rely on our brain state. Our children rely on our brain state, our adult brain state, in order to heal their trauma. They are dependent on us. They cannot heal separate from us because we only heal in relationship. So they are dependent on our brain state. If the moment they are acting out, we go into a regress state, we cannot help them heal. We cannot help them heal. So let's talk about these things, some common traumatic events. These are common ones in the profession that we work in, right? But there are so many. That's why I want you to remember, it's any stressful event. It could be hot coffee. Remember the McDonald's woman? Right? That woman potentially could have been traumatized with hot fluid from the rest of her life. How many kids do you know that don't like to get in the bath? Sometimes that comes because their in utero experience was so traumatic. Sometimes it comes because they were scolded. Sometimes it comes just because they're so sensitive to stress, it's overwhelming, or they don't like to brush their teeth, or they don't like tags on the back of their shirts. See, we call that autistic. If you don't want to wear socks, you don't want to wear a shirt with tags, it's not just autistic. You're autistic because you're stress sensitive. And in your stress sensitivity, you shut down until you come out fighting. We all have these patterns. So these are common traumatic events. Common traumatic events. Abuse. We're familiar with these. Neglect. Adoption and foster care. Frequent moves. Chronic pain. Emotional absence. Parental depression. Needs left unmet. All of these things expose the brain to a constant state of stress. And when the brain is exposed to a constant state of stress, it's like it's going to the gym 3 to 4 times a day, and it's on steroids. The amygdala becomes really big and really sensitive because the amygdala is the part of your brain that's responsible for helping you create safety in your life. It's the part of your brain responsible for survival. But what do all of these things have in common? They all occur in the context of human relationships. Why is this important? This is important because if I've gone through these experiences in my life, then I have blueprints in my brain, fear-based blueprints in my brain that tell me other people are not safe. I have working blueprints in my brain that tell me that you are not safe when I become stressed. When I become stressed, you are a threat because of what I've experienced in my early life. My blueprints get turned on. When I get stressed and I regress, my blueprints get turned on. When my blueprints get turned on, I'm hostage to my blueprints. When I get stressed and I regress, my blueprints get turned on, I'm hostage to my blueprints. But now here's where it gets really tricky. Because parental depression and emotional absence are the 2 most common forms of trauma in our society. If you grew up in the most loving home, the most consistent home, the most predictable home, most nurturing home, in our society, you probably lived in an environment of parental depression or emotional absence. Because you had parents who worked hard to take care of you and to provide for you, and when they got home, they didn't have much left in the tank. And guess what? Tiffany Fields, she's a researcher at the University of Miami. She did studies of these infants. She took this one infant who had a healthy parent. Of course, there was many of them. One infant with a healthy parent and another infant with a depressed parent. She hooked them up to these brain monitors. The brain monitors looked exactly the same when the healthy parent got up and walked away from her baby as compared to when the depressed parent walked towards her baby. If you've got a healthy, loving, nurturing parent, and they get up and they walk away from you, it's going to cause a stress reaction. because they're your safety figure. Well, imagine if every time your parent walked towards you it caused a stress reaction. That's the power. That's the power of parental depression and emotional absence. And you know what? Those are the two least studied traumatic experiences in our society because you can't see them. You can't see them. So science says if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. But it exists all around us because it's a vibration. It's the vibration of stress. When you become stressed, you emit a vibration of emotional absence, not a vibration of emotional connection. So it becomes very important because you may not say a word to your kids. I'm back to this room. You may not say a word to your foster and adopted kinship children. And they'll feel stress. And they'll feel abandonment. They'll feel rejection. And it may not have anything to do with them. And before you know it, they're acting out. Why? Because they got stressed out. And when they got stressed out, they regressed. And they regressed into that really scary part of their brain where all that trauma and all that fear and all that pain is stored. Simply because that vibration that got emitted told them that they were not safe. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything to send that vibration. Now imagine when you yell or when you hit, or when you threaten, or when you shame. Now think about that, especially considering that kind of behavior towards children, the hitting, the shaming, the yelling, the isolating, sending to the room, the grounding, the threatening, is all based in stress and fear. The most common parenting techniques that we do in society are based in stress and fear. The most common parenting techniques, timeout, that's on the same continuum as jail. That's on the same continuum as isolation in prisons. It's just a lesser form. It's based in stress and fear. There's no relationship, and there's the absence of relationship. Now think about that. Has anyone in here ever gotten spanked and felt good about it? Like daddy was hitting you and you was like, oh, daddy, thank you. Not me. Because spanking stresses you out. What about having your favorite thing taken away from you? Anyone in here ever feel good about that when your parents did that to you? Or when you got grounded? No. The most common things we do with children are based in stress and fear and control. Stress and fear and control. And this is why children don't get better, they only get older. Because how we are wired, the paradigm that we pursue, the blueprints that drive our behaviors are based in stress and fear. And if the blueprints that drive my behaviors are based in stress and fear, and you come from an environment of stress and fear, so you come out of this traumatic environment, you come out of this environment of abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, deprivation, drug and alcohol use, domestic violence. You come out of that environment into my home, into my presence, and my imprints are those of stress and fear, and my imprints around negative behaviors are based in stress and fear, so you're already stressed out and fearful. So now you do things that I don't like because you're acting out because you're stressed out, and then you become regressed. Then I become stressed, and then I become regressed, and my blueprints get turned on, and your blueprints get turned on, and now we're both operating from a place of stress and fear. Stress and fear don't heal the brain. Stress and fear break the brain down. Prolonged states of stress, cortisol, damages the brain. The children that you have in your homes, they have brain damage. So you could very well say to your teenager, are you brain damaged? And mean it. but we don't see it. Some of us have brain damage, and we don't see it. Prolonged states of stress and fear damage a part of your brain called the hippocampus. Your hippocampus is a part of your brain responsible for your short-term memory and your clear thinking. It helps send a signal to your prefrontal brain that tells you how to behave and how to act and how to be in social and emotional situations. Well, that overwhelming state of stress damages those dendrites in the hippocampus, causes it to shrink and shrivel. And then that prolonged state of stress and fear, it strengthens your amygdala. So your amygdala is all of a sudden getting stronger and bigger and more sensitive. And so one of the parts of your brain that's supposed to be helping you calm down is getting damaged, and the part of your brain that's making you move into survival and be on alert all the time is getting stronger. And so you come into my home as a child with this already existing state of your brain. You're already easily overwhelmed. You already shut down, or you already act out. And then when you act out, I get stressed out, and then I drop into my brain, and then all of a sudden, we're both stressed out. Stress doesn't heal the brain. Prolonged states of repetition and relationship is what heals the brain. Prolonged states of regulation, repetition of regulation, and repetition of relationships is what heals the brain. When children are put in environments to where their stress can be repaired, where they can have a sustained, secure relationship, where they can be in an environment that's regulated, and that's a term I use a lot, I'm going to talk about in just a moment, means a calm environment. That's what heals the brain. Relationship is what heals the brain. Relationship. And the moment you become stressed, you move out of relationship. We have 1 trillion cells throughout our body and our brain. We actually have as many neurons and as many synaptic connections in our heart as in our gut, in our heart and in our gut as we do in our brain. It's in our whole body. So you have trillions of cells that run through your body-mind system. So hold your hand up for just a minute. Pretend this is a cell in your body. I'm going to say stress. Stress. Now ball it up, because now it's becoming constricted, because your body only knows 2 states. It knows a surviving state and it knows a thriving state. When you become stressed, you move into fear, you move into survival. I'm going to say that again. When you become stressed, you move into fear, you move into survival. So now stress, ball it up good tight now, you are stressed out. Now in that state of stress, shake hands with the person next to you. Go ahead. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. If I'm insistent, pretty soon you end up with bloody knuckles. This is what's happening in families all the time. All the time, families are trying to be in a relationship, and they're in stress, and they're not in a relationship, they're in survival. Unless you can calm down, unless you can regulate, unless you can move from surviving to thriving, you cannot be in a relationship, because you can't be open. Thriving in relationship is based in love. Surviving and control is based in fear. We have to be able to get to a place of consistent, prolonged repetition of relationship before we can create healing. If we stay in a state of stress and in a state of fear, we don't create healing. We only give children the opportunity to grow up. 2 important terms, regulation and dysregulation. Regulation is the ability to experience and maintain stress within a window of tolerance. It's the ability to maintain stress within a window of tolerance. Every single morning we all wake up with this window of tolerance. And that window of tolerance is what we use to dictate how we relate in the environment, in relationships, and at work, in our behaviors. And we use that window of tolerance all day long to deal with our stress. But the thing is the more we go through each day, the smaller our window of tolerance gets, because stress is unavoidable. Stress is unavoidable. As soon as the alarm clock goes off in the morning, you're stressed. Driving to work, flipping people off. I've seen you before. You're stressed. Then you go to work. You got to deal with stuff at work. Then you're worried about bills. Then you got to worry about dinner. Then you got to worry about the kids getting phone calls from the school. You haven't even got home yet. So then you work all day, and you got to drive home, flipping off those same people. You flipped off them earlier in the morning. By the time you get home, your window of tolerance is shrunk. I always say that we spend the greatest majority of our time and energy on the things that matter the least, and the ones who need it the most get the least of it. Because now you're home and you ain't got no patience left. All you want to do is chill out. You don't want to hear no fussing. You don't want to hear no crying. You certainly don't want to deal with no negative behaviors. You just want to have a pleasant, calm dinner. You want everyone to do what they're supposed to do. Get in the bathtub, brush your teeth, and go get into bed. And maybe I'll read you a paragraph or two. That's our window of tolerance. When our window of tolerance shrinks, stress becomes more pronounced. That's when we move into dysregulation. Dysregulation is the experience of stress outside of your window of tolerance. When you become stressed out, you move into a state called affect dysregulation. So I like for us to use that word dysregulation more than stress, because stress these days, we're just like, yeah, I'm stressed, he's stressed, she's stressed, whatever. When you go back to work on Monday, your colleague says, how you doing? I want you to say, I'm dysregulated. You're like, what? Well, listen to this. This is so important. So I've got like these 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 concepts that I think are really important. This is one of them. Just consider this for a moment. It is believed that affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. It is believed that affect dysregulation, being stressed out, is the fundamental cause of all psychological, emotional, and behavioral challenges. That's my new wording. Now think about that for a moment. It is believed that being stressed out is the fundamental cause of all psychological, emotional, and behavioral challenges. If that is true, do you not immediately feel more empowered? So I want you to think about it for a moment. Take a deep breath with me. Let's take one more. Stand up for a minute. Stand up. Give the person next to you a hug. If you understand that, if you will allow that, and it takes repetition to change your paradigm. It takes 2 things that it takes to change your paradigm, the way you see the world. Repetition and emotional impact. That's how you change your blueprints. Repetition and emotional impact. If you really understand that stress is the fundamental cause of all psychological, emotional, and behavioral challenges, guess what that empowers you to do? The only thing you have to figure out, the only thing you have to figure out, I figured this out 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I figured this out. That if being stressed out is the fundamental cause of all psychological, emotional, and behavioral challenges, the only thing we have to figure out is how to reduce stress. That's it. It's that simple. Because you reduce stress, you reduce fear. When you reduce stress and you reduce fear, you increase love. Perfect love casts out all fear. Love and fear cannot coexist. When you are stressed and you are in fear, there is no space for love. When you can reduce stress, you reduce fear and you increase love. If you really understand that being stressed out is the fundamental reason for all psychological, emotional, and behavioral challenges, then you know that the only thing you have to do at any given moment, when you're seeing problem behaviors, at any given moment, when you're not feeling good about your relationship with your child, or your spouse, or your coworker, or anyone else, the only thing you have to do, and I'm telling you this, after 20 years of experience, 20 years of having traveled around the world and worked with the most difficult children and some of the most challenging adults, I am telling you, the only thing you have to do is reduce stress. That is it. You just ask yourself, what are 3 things I can do? What are 3 things I can do that reduce stress, and what are 3 things that I do that increase stress? Do less of the things that increase and do more of the things that reduce. Paradigm shift right there. See, we want to make things way too complicated. But you know why we make them so complicated? We make things complicated because of the brain. Your amygdala is what makes things complicated. Your amygdala is your fear receptor. And in your handouts, you should have a key terms to remember. Is that in there? Okay, good. Your amygdala, and I really have no idea about time, so can someone tell me we're at an hour already? I've got an hour. Just an hour? Your amygdala is your fear receptor in your brain. This is that part of your brain that gets exercised when you live in a state of stress. So the children that you have in your homes, they've lived in a state of stress, they've got very strong, overdeveloped amygdalas. This is why they're stress sensitive. This is why they're fearful. Because your amygdala is all about fear. It's all it does. It's the emotional part of your brain. It doesn't think, it just reacts. It's responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. And fight, flight, and freeze are reactions. The difference between a reaction and a response is that a reaction does not require thought. It is just all emotional. It just goes blah! That's all it does. It is your caveman brain, your reptilian brain. Fight, flight, or freeze. And we always freeze first, and then we fight or we flee. An oppositional defiant child is a scared child. When a child is defiant, it's because their brain has gone into a state of freeze. When a child is acting like they don't hear what you're saying, it's because they're in a state of freeze. When they act like when you think they're ignoring you, it's not because they're ignoring you, it's because they're in a state of freeze. But see, that goes right up against all of your blueprints. Because you have generations of blueprints that tell you different. You have generations of blueprints that tell you that children are willfully disobedient, that they are defiant, and that they are manipulative, and that they are controlling. And that when they misbehave, they need their little butts whipped. That's what every one of your blueprints says. Now, you've overwritten that over the years. We don't whip as much, but you know that 90% of adults still believe it's okay to hit a 2-year-old? 90% of adults in America still believe it's okay to hit a 2-year-old. You know what that tells me? That conditioning, those blueprints for stress and fear are still very much pronounced. But there's a lot of things that tell me that. So your amygdala just reacts. So when your child hits that sensory experience, and it doesn't matter, it's all unconscious, who knows what's going to cause it, but they have that sensory experience that triggers their amygdala stirs up the brainstem. Depending on the level of stress, the amygdala stirs up the brainstem. The brainstem is where those blueprints are at. The brainstem is where all those painful memories are at. The brainstem, that's the regression. When the amygdala gets activated, it regresses into the brainstem. That's where all those blueprints are at. Now, when your child misbehaves, this is where it gets real tricky and real nasty. Because when your child misbehaves, you get regressed. Because as soon as you see a behavior that you don't like, it is a threat. When we see behaviors we don't like, they become threats. And our amygdala becomes activated and starts pouring out cortisol. The cortisol overwhelms the hypothalamus, it overwhelms the hippocampus, it disrupts the prefrontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex. Your orbitofrontal cortex is your executive control center for all of your social and emotional functioning. So when you get really stressed out and that cortisol starts pouring through your brain, everything else gets disrupted. Joseph Ledoux, New York University neuroscientist, wrote a book called The Emotional Brain. He says, this is another one of those little statements that I think is so important. I would tell you to write it down, but I know you're not going to. But I'm going to repeat it 3 or 4 or 5 times just for that one person who thinks, I better write this down. In times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted and suppresses our short-term memory. In times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted and suppresses our short-term memory. This is why when your child is misbehaving, everything gets real complicated because you're not thinking clearly. Your cortisol in your brain is causing your thinking to become confused and distorted. You don't see a 5-year-old, you see a future serial killer. You don't remember that just 10 minutes ago you guys were loving and nurturing and hugging on one another and cuddling and snuggling. And neither do they. In times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted and our short-term memory is suppressed. That's why we make things so complicated. Because when our amygdala is activated, it's just looking for a threat. It's just looking for a threat. It's just looking for a threat. Everything that shows up is a threat. So when we are stressed out, that's what we do. We look for threats. A smile is a threat. A huff is a threat. An eye roll is a threat. If I don't reply to you right away, that's a threat. If I slam the door, that's a threat. If I yell at you, that's a threat. Everything becomes a threat when you're stressed out because your amygdala is activated, and that's all it's doing is looking for a threat. I'm talking about our adult brains. And if our adult brains get activated and start looking for threats and then drop into our brainstem, we regress into our brainstem to when Dad used to whip our butt, or when we were in a car wreck, or when we were in a domestic violence situation, or when we were raped, or when we were abused, or when we were deprived. I'm talking about you and I. Or when we were rejected, or when we were abandoned. That's what shows up. That becomes our reality in that moment. And in that moment, our children are looking at us to provide regulation for them. In that moment, our children are looking for us to regulate their brains. Because an acting out child is a stressed out child. An acting out child is a stressed out child. An acting out child is a stressed out child. And a stressed out child has exceeded their window of tolerance. And 9 times out of 10 has dropped into their brainstem and is reacting from their trauma. It has nothing to do with you. Nothing at all. But you're going to see their behavior as a threat. And when you see their behavior as a threat, your little amygdala gets activated. And then all of a sudden, all your junk is stirred up. And then what's not happening is one thing that's got to happen, that has to happen, that is essential that happens, is we're not turning on oxytocin. Oxytocin is the science of love and parenting. Oxytocin is a little hormone in your brain secreted by the hypothalamus. It is known as the love hormone. It is known as your anti-stress hormone. So when your cortisol, when your amygdala releases cortisol, your hypothalamus is supposed to turn on and release oxytocin. That's how we calm ourselves down. We don't calm ourselves down by being told to calm down. We calm ourselves down by turning on oxytocin, our anti-stress hormone. But here's the thing. Oxytocin is a learned response in your brain. It is a learned response in your brain, meaning it must be taught to you. Now here's the truth of the matter. Most of us were raised in loving homes. We know our parents love us. They may have been hard parents. They may have spanked, they may have yelled, they may have whipped, and all that kind of stuff. But most of us fundamentally were raised in consistent, predictable homes. If you were raised in some of these small rural communities around Michigan, you were raised in a consistent, predictable way. A secure way. You knew that when you went to school that you were going to come home, you're going to have a home, you're probably going to have some food, you had decent shoes, yeah, maybe they came from Walmart, Kmart, wherever, because your parents worked. But you were okay. And so for all the emotional absence and the parental depression that may have existed, we're fundamentally okay. So our brains operate pretty well. So when we get stressed out now, we do okay with calming ourselves down. It takes some of us longer than others. But I'm 46 on June 4th. I'm 46 years old. I don't know how old you are. It's taken me a long time to get to that place. A long time. And sometimes my stress and my fears still get the better of me. They still get the better of me, and I don't calm myself down as fast as I'd like to. And I've been teaching this stuff for 20 years. Imagine you've got a child who's 2 years old, or 5 years old, or 10 years old, or 15 years old. And they've been in 10 different foster placements. That's just while they've been in foster care. They've been in 10 different foster placements. Some of those abusive. They might be on 3 different medications. They've been in all kinds of different therapy already. They may have even been in a group home. That's just while they've been in the system. We're not even yet at the place of looking at what they came from, where the hardwiring really took place. The abuse, the neglect, the deprivation, the deep stuff, the buried stuff. Now, how much oxytocin response do you think they've learned? Let's just be honest. How much oxytocin do you think a child who's been in 10 different placements, a residential visit, 3 different psychiatric medications, 3 or 4 diagnoses, just while they've been in the system? Not to mention the first 3 years they spent with their drug-addicted parents, their father who wasn't even there, and the 2 or 3 other siblings they had to take care of, and the days that they went without food, or the number of times the boyfriend came into the kid's bedroom and had sex with them. Well, like, we're not even talking about that yet. How much oxytocin do you think this child's brain is supposed to have? Do you have a degree? Do you have a number? Like, how much are they supposed to have? So when they get stressed out, just how much are they supposed to be able to handle? When they get stressed out and overwhelmed and they drop into their brainstem, just how much do we think they're supposed to handle? Because we have this high expectation for how adopted and foster children and kinship-placed children should behave. All that behavior is based on their ability to release oxytocin in the midst of stress. All of that behavior is based on their ability to turn on oxytocin in the presence of stress. And if they come from an environment of neglect and abuse and overwhelm and absence and frequent moves. How much oxytocin do they really have? So I'm going to just do you a favor. Just consider that they have none. Just consider that they have none. And you know what that means? That means we have to take responsibility. Because now it's my responsibility to teach your brain how to release oxytocin when you are stressed. And you know what the first step of that is? The very first step of me teaching your brain how to release oxytocin when you're stressed is calming my own brain. If I cannot dial down my amygdala, my stress, and my fear, I cannot teach you oxytocin. And if I cannot teach you oxytocin, I can't help you heal. Because ultimately, I'm not really in a relationship with you. We're just living together. You're just living in my home. How much time do I have?
45.
I got 45 minutes?
Yeah.
Slow down. I call this the educational success model. This is especially important for teachers. But it's really important for all of us in every different scenario. Because this is the science. And again, I'm very basic. You can go to a neuroscientist and get all complicated and get into the dendrites and the synapses and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just giving you the basics, and that's all you need. Bruce Perry says that if you work with children, you need to have a generalist understanding of the brain. A generalist understanding of the brain. So since I got 45 minutes, let's back up for just a minute. So your amygdala releases cortisol, which passes to the pituitary. Your hypothalamus sits alongside the pituitary, and that's the part of your brain that's supposed to release oxytocin. Now, also within the structure of the hypothalamus is a little nerve structure, a little nerve bundle called your suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is gonna be exciting for some of you. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus is the part of your brain that controls your circadian rhythms. Your circadian rhythms decide whether you are hungry or not. Your circadian rhythms tell you whether or not you're tired and whether or not you're ready to go to sleep. Your circadian rhythms tell you to wake up. But if you've got an overwhelming amount of cortisol flushing through your brain, guess what's being knocked off balance? Your suprachiasmatic nucleus. Your circadian rhythms are disrupted. So you want to know why your kid doesn't want to eat. You want to know why your kid won't go to bed. You want to know why your kid doesn't want to wake up. You want to know why your kid's not potty trained. It's their circadian rhythms. They've experienced so much stress, the control system in their brain for helping them calm down and recognize that they're hungry. See, some children don't even recognize that they're hungry. Those are called failure to thrive children. They lived in such an environment of neglect and deprivation that dial in their brain has been turned all the way down. They don't even know it. They don't even want to eat. They don't want to eat because they don't know that they're hungry. So they just go, 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 go. And some children, that dial's turned all the way up. They just want to eat all the time. Because it's the only thing that makes them feel good. Why does eating make you feel good? Because eating releases oxytocin. Oh my gosh, on Facebook yesterday, my mom posted this video of this baby. It says, when I see food, and it's this baby doing this. Oh, it's so funny. Eating releases oxytocin. Eye contact releases oxytocin. Hugs release oxytocin. Touch releases oxytocin. These two lovebirds right here. Just in love. Holding hands. Just looking at each other, just in love. It's oxytocin. Oxytocin is preventative to stress. It shields the brain from stress. But when mom is pregnant and mom is experiencing a great deal of stress, she is releasing a great deal of cortisol, and that cortisol is flushing through the womb. Flushing through the womb at that early stage. And your amygdala, your fear receptor, it completes its development when it's 18 months old. So some children who hit 18 months, they have an amygdala operating in their brain like they've been living here for 3 years. It's twice the size. It's twice as sensitive because of how much stress they've been experiencing. And that hypothalamus and that hippocampus, it's deficient. It's diminished, it's delayed, it's damaged. Because your hippocampus doesn't complete its development until the 36th month, until you're 3 years old. Until you're 3 years old, you don't even begin to have the capacity to think clearly and have effective short-term memory. 3 years old. That's in a normal, healthy environment. And what if you come from some of these environments that these children do? Do they have that? No, it's not even turned on yet. We think they should act right. We wonder why children bite other children. They bite because they are scared. They bite because they are stressed. And what's the first thing that we usually do as adults when children are biting other children? Some of us have bitten back. Some of you just sitting there embarrassed right now. How much sense does that make? I know some adults who have bitten some kids. Think about that. If a child is biting because they are stressed out and they are in survival, and we bite them back, how is that supposed to change anything? What that does is it makes the kid afraid of us, which then just reinforces that human relationship trauma. So then we make the ability to help that child find soothing that much more diminished. We do some crazy things. We do a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense because when you're stressed, your thinking is confused and distorted. It's really simple. When you're stressed, your thinking is confused and distorted. Your short-term memory shut off. Your short-term memory will tell you, don't bite that baby. That's what your short-term memory is good for. We don't bite kids. Don't bite kids. But when your short-term memory gets shut off, you're like, we don't bite. No biting. No biting. We don't hit. Don't hit. Don't hit. Don't hit. When I was a kid, my dad used to try to teach me how to remember math cards. He had these flashcards. When I get it wrong, bang, he popped me upside the head. First time I'd be okay, but shoot, by 2 to 3, 4 times, bam, bam, I'm crying. I'm like, oh, bam. I still hate math. Worst at it. Think about these things. When we're stressed, our thinking is confused and distorted. Our short-term memory is suppressed. We're not thinking clearly. We can't remember. And we're adults. Imagine how much more challenging it is for some of these kids. Some of these kids who came from nothing. Some of these kids who haven't even begun to develop the ability to release oxytocin in the midst of stress. I believe fundamentally that everything we do with kids should be oriented towards oxytocin. See, stress is unavoidable. And stress is important because without stress, our brains wouldn't even develop. Without stress, we couldn't regulate temperatures. Without stress, we couldn't digest food. Without stress, we couldn't laugh. Without stress, we couldn't get along. But it's the repair of stress that becomes so important. It's the repair of stress. It's not that children are supposed to live in environments where they don't ever get stressed out. That's not reasonable. That's not realistic. It's the repair of stress. It's when we stop repairing the stress that we have the problem. When we start creating more of it. When we start creating more stress for these kids who've already lived their lives being stressed out, you're going to get nothing more than what you're already getting. Bishop T.D. Jakes says, if you always do what you've always done, you will always be where you've already been. If your reaction, I'm going to call it a reaction because it's not a response, because it's a reaction because you're not thinking clearly. You're not thinking clearly. If your reaction to a child who is acting out is to do something towards that child more stressful, you're only going to get more of what you're trying to reduce. Because it's your reaction, because you're not thinking clearly. It's automatic, it's unconscious, it's coming from your own stuff. So the educational success model. It always starts from the bottom. It's going to start from the brain. It's the way I look at it. Start from the brain and go up. When we are stressed, we are in our amygdala and our brain stem. When we become stressed, and I'm going to say it again, an acting out child is a stressed out child. So you think about a classroom right now. You got a kid in a classroom who's already acting out. They're already acting out. Listen, there's no way that child is going to learn. Because they're acting out, it means they're stressed out, which means they're in their amygdala and their brainstem. They're in a survival and in a reacting state of their brain. All they can do is survive. Learning doesn't exist at that level of brain functioning. That's where they're at. They're in a state of survival. They're not in a state of thriving. See, we only thrive when we can move up to that higher level part of our brain. See, that's where normal kids come from. Normal kids who don't experience a great deal of stress and trauma in their early lives, and they have the consistency and the predictability, see, they go to school and they learn just fine because they don't ever even drop into survival and reacting. They always operate right between processing and thriving and integration. They're always releasing oxytocin. So they learn efficiently. Well, see, these are the kids that always get to go on the field trips. These are the kids who always get all their points and all their stars, and they always get the rewards because their brains can tolerate stress. Our kids can't. So when our kids are acting out and they're in school, there's no learning that's going to happen. So the most important thing for an educator to do at that point in time, same way with it at home. When your child is acting out, they're not going to learn anything. Stop talking to them. Stop lecturing them. Stop yelling. Stop trying to teach them anything. They're not going to learn. It's shut off. The most effective thing you can do is start breathing and calming yourself down and start thinking about what do I need to do to help this child start to calm down. Because when I can start this child on the pathway to calming down, they move up to the hypothalamus. See, what I'm doing is I'm turning on their oxytocin response. When my child is stressed out and I am calming myself down and I'm not becoming more overwhelming or more threatening or more shaming or more blaming, I am turning on their oxytocin response because I'm turning on my oxytocin response. So I'm engaging their hypothalamus instead of their amygdala. When my child is acting out and stressed out and I'm engaging their hypothalamus instead of their amygdala, I'm going to get less negative behavior. So I have to calm myself down first so I can turn on my oxytocin response. So that means initially I might not say anything to you. And let me tell you why that's so hard. I want to show you why that's so hard. Because when the child is misbehaving, our amygdala gets activated and sends us into fight, flight, or freeze. So it's hard for us not to say something about the behavior. It's hard for us to not want to do something. Jesus help me. To want to do something about the behavior. Because our amygdala is telling us that we need to be in survival. Our amygdala is saying threat, 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 threat. But that's all your amygdala does. It says threat, threat, threat. And it wants you to control the behavior. It wants you to suppress the behavior. It wants you to make the behavior go away. And that's conditioned for generations. You've got generations of conditioning. Generations of conditioning that tell you to obsess on that behavior and make that behavior go away. Control that behavior. Suppress that behavior. Generations of conditioning that tell you when that child rolls their eyes at you, oh, help me, Lord, I'm going to knock those eyeballs in the back of your head. Generations tell you that. The thing is, some of the generations where some of that stuff came from, it really was important not to roll your eyes. If I go back three generations, my great-grandfather still had whip marks on his back from being a slave. As a slave, you better not roll your eyes. So you can understand how it's based in survival. That's in our DNA. That fear that comes over us, and see, we don't even realize it's fear. When our children do stuff like roll their eyes, when they huff and they puff and they stomp or they slam the door, we don't realize that it's stressing us out and causing us fear. And we don't realize all those unconscious imprints that are driving that behavior. See, it comes from a really deep place. But that doesn't exist anymore. We don't deal with the same levels of threat we did then 3 generations ago. We don't have to be the same people we had to be then. But in order not to do that, we have to change our DNA. And the only way you change your DNA is through repetition of relationships and regulated environments. And over time, see, this is big work you're actually doing. Because this work actually starts to change your lineage. This is not just raising a foster kid or raising an adopted kid or a kinship placement. This is changing the lineage of your DNA. Your behavior towards your kids now is what they're gonna do with your grandkids, and then your great grandkids. So this is a really big deal. So that's why it's so hard for us when children are acting out to turn on oxytocin, because we see a threat, but that threat isn't even there. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say 97% of the time, when your child is misbehaving, it is not that big a deal. It just isn't. But you have all this hardwiring in your brain that tells you how serious it is. And then you don't realize that your amygdala reaction is only creating more stress and more fear. So you're not turning on that hypothalamus. If you're not turning on that hypothalamus, you're not even getting the child up to the place where they can start to respond. Because until you get them up to the place that they can start to respond, they can't get up to the place where they can start processing and start thinking. See, I got to get them up to responding, and then I got to get them up to processing before they can even start to learn. So if my child is misbehaving, I'm not going to yell at them. I'm not going to get stressed and try to teach them something right in that moment, because their brain's not there. I got to breathe. I got to calm myself down. I got to figure out how I can reduce stress, how I can stay present, how I can not get overwhelmed, how I can connect, maybe how I can just leave them alone for a little bit. I might just need to go in the kitchen and start washing dishes and not say a word. So I can calm down and turn on my oxytocin, and I can go back, and maybe they've done some of it themselves. Maybe they've dialed up a little oxytocin on their own. Now they're up in that place where they're processing a little bit. And I'm talking about later that night. I'm talking about the next day. Hey, honey, you know the other day when we had that thing happen? Man, that made me sad. How'd that make you feel? That really scared me. Yeah. I didn't mean to do that. I know you didn't. I just want you to know we're safe, we're good. Okay. Then they remember. See, now they're learning. Now they can learn because their brain's dialed up. It's turned on. But in the moment of stress, they can't hear that. And it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that, guys. You've just been conditioned to believe that you got to beat the tar out of a kid in order for them to learn anything. And we don't learn that way. Hopefully you're not beating the tar out of any kids. Figuratively. You can beat them with your words, with their games or whatever. And then you move up to threat and survival. All right, so let's talk about the 3 pathways of emotional expression. We're going to be winding up. Here pretty quick. This is very important, but first I want you to think about yourself as a child. when you were a child, you have to understand that we all have three pathways through which we express our emotions. What is an emotion? It is energy in motion, and our body only knows two states of energy, a thriving energy and a surviving energy. That's the only two states of energy your body knows. So your body only knows two emotions, love and fear. There are only two emotions, love and fear. A feeling is a cognitive perception of an emotion. A feeling is a cognitive, your thinking brain, your left hemisphere, interpreting your emotional brain, your emotions, and labeling it as a feeling. That's a feeling. You only know love and fear. Those are the only two energy states that exist, surviving and thriving. You're either surviving or you're thriving in any given situation. Anger is fear. So we have three pathways through which we express our emotions: attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. Now, when you were a kid, you rolled your eyes. How many of you could roll your eyes at your parents and feel safe about it? Not likely. Right? But that was an attitudinal expression. If you couldn't express through your attitudes, you get suppressed through your feelings. So if you hear, don't cry. If you hear, don't roll your eyes at me. If you hear, don't huff and puff. If you hear, just do what I tell you to do. Then your attitudes are not okay, so you go to your feelings. How many of you as kids could yell at your parents and cuss at your parents? You could not if you wanted to maintain your life, your dignity, and your home. Feelings become not okay. If you hear enough, don't cry, don't you yell, don't you talk to me that way. Children are to be seen and not heard. If you hear that enough, your feelings get suppressed. So now you can't express through your attitudes, you can't express through your feelings. If you can't express through your attitudes and you can't express through your feelings, you're left with behaviors. How many of you could freely misbehave as children? Not if you wanted to live. That was always a looming threat, right? I brought you into this world, I will take you back. We behaved because we did not want to get beaten. There's always that threat, always that threat. If you can't express through your attitudes, and you can't express through your feelings, and you can't express through your behaviors, guess what you're left with? Anger and depression. Anger and depression become your only two pathways, and anger and depression have to come through behaviors. If you can't express your attitudes, you can't express your feelings, you are stuck with anger, depression, and behaviors. Anger, depression, and behaviors. And I call this the trauma triangle. And if you spend 6 months or longer, 6 months or longer in the trauma triangle, that is living in an environment of trauma. In the trauma triangle is where you get diagnosis, it's where you get medication, it's where you get disruptive placements, it's where you get residential treatment, it's where you get restraint, it's where you get a lot of isolation, severe behavior modification. All that occurs down at the level of the trauma triangle. Now we're going to back up to that thing about thinking. Stress causes confused and distorted thinking, suppress our short-term memory. If I cannot express through my attitudes and I cannot express through my feelings, and the only thing I can express is my behaviors, because I don't have any other way to express through my anger and my depression, it's got to come out. It's got to come out. What am I learning? What am I being taught? If I can't express through my attitudes, and I can't express through my feelings, and all I can really do is express through my anger and depression, what am I being taught? I'm being taught that the only way to express is through anger, depression, and behaviors. And that's what's being reinforced. That's what's being reinforced all the time. When we don't want our children's attitudes, when we don't want our children's feelings, we're reinforcing their negative behavior. We're doing that. They're not doing that. We're doing that. That's why children grow older and not better. Because we're reinforcing the behavior. When we don't want the attitudes, when we don't want the feelings, because of our own stress and our own fear and our own generational imprints, we're reinforcing the negative behavior. We're doing that. And this is why our children are not healing and getting better. Because we get so stressed out by attitudes and feelings. When was the last child rolling their eyes? When was the last time a window got broken out from your child yelling? When was the last time your car got stolen because your child huffed and puffed? When was the last time someone got sexually abused because the child didn't want to take out the trash? It doesn't happen. I'd rather have your attitudes. In fact, I will celebrate your attitudes. I'd rather you cuss me out than get this. Don't get this. You cussing me up upside down the mother. Because as long as you're cussing me out, you're not hitting me. As long as you're rolling your eyes and huffing and puffing, you're not hitting. You're not breaking things. We're not fighting and wrestling on the floor. There's no threat to attitudes and feelings, guys. That's just generational imprints. The only thing telling you that a kid shouldn't roll their eyes is generational imprints, because you do it all day, every day. You go to work on Monday, your boss says something you don't like, you shoulder. Because that's how we transition through emotion. We have to transition through emotion in order to get from point A to point B. If we can't transition to emotion, it just gets stuck. It gets stuck within us. Your kids rolling your eyes is nothing more than a signal. It's nothing more than a signal that they're trying to transition, that they're having some kind of feelings. Them expressing their feelings is nothing more than a signal. That's it. Tell me how you feel. I want to know how you feel. I want to know how to yell it if you want to. Cuss if you want to. You have every reason to curse. Tell me one of your kids you're raising right now that doesn't have every daggone reason in the world to cuss all day, every day. Tell me one kid that you're raising that hasn't been through some bullshit, that doesn't have every right to cuss. And we want to get them in our homes and tell them they can't cuss. I'm going to cuss for you. See, that's the difference. That's the difference. If it's me and you, I'm going to cuss for you because I'm mad that you've gone through what you've gone through. I'm mad and I'm sad and I'm hurt. And every time that shows up in your behavior, I'm mad and sad and hurt because you've gone through some shit that makes you feel unsafe. And you can't feel safe with me because of all that. So by God, we're going to fight through it. We're going to fight through it. And we're going to get on the other side of it. But I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for your heart. I'm going to fight for your emotions. I'm going to fight to help you get through all that pain that tells you that I'm a threat. I'm going to fight to get to that place so you can trust that some adult in your life has your freaking back.
Amen.
What's that require? It requires courage. It requires courage, not the absence of fear. We all get scared. We all get overwhelmed. We all don't know what to do sometimes. Some of these kids' behavior is just weird. Just weird. You don't know. What? I don't get it. They're just stressed. And you get stressed, you get scared, and there we go. All right, here's the thing. I'm going to give you guys a book for free. It's my best-selling book, From Fear to Love. Parenting difficult adopted foster children and children with multiple diagnoses. All you got to do is cover the shipping and handling. But here's the thing, I'm also going to give you the audio book to it. So you're going to get the book, we mail it to you, and you also get the audio book. So write down, and please snip very well. Write this down, www.feartolovebook.com. Feartolovebook.com. Go to that website. You get your book, we'll mail it to you, and you get the audio book, and you get the ebook. So, plan on doing that. Bruce Lee says one of the best lessons you can learn in life is to master how to remain calm. He's absolutely right. So after all of that, if there's one thing that I could teach you, and one thing only, it would be how to breathe in the midst of stress. So I carry this little bowl just to give us a little practice. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling and exhaling. Because when you become stressed out, the first thing you do is you stop breathing. If you want to master how to remain calm, which means you master how to keep your thoughts clear, how to keep your short-term memory activated, you've got to master how to breathe when you're feeling stressed. So let's breathe. Practice your breathing when you're calm. Because if you practice your breathing, if you wait to breathe when you're stressed, you're already stressed. You're not going to breathe. Bruce Perry says that we're biologically engineered to be in a relationship. Every dendrite, every synapse, every cell is engineered to be in a relationship. And I believe that if this is true, then the relationship becomes the single most important thing. Not the behaviors, the relationship. A focus on behavior will bring you further away from your child. Don't focus on the behavior, focus on the relationship. Because the relationship will soothe the behavior and it will help your child to heal. Without relationship, your child cannot heal. But the only way you can be in a relationship is if you can calm yourself down and turn on oxytocin, reduce stress. So I call that the relationships factor. God bless you. Thank you for your time and attention, and keep up the great work. One question, I'm probably going to take 10 minutes. Yeah, question?
Yeah, one thing I'm curious about is how to try to kind of stress the importance of like schooling to some of these kids with these, like you're trying to bring down their stress, but they're not. Our problem is we want them to focus on their schoolwork.
That's great. That's a great question.
Brian,
so
can you
question,
yep, perfect.
The question is, I've been doing this for a little while. The question is, how do you stress the importance, which is a good use of that word, how do you stress the importance of school when you're trying to reduce the stress around all the other challenges? And here's the thing. This is going to be a hard one because schools don't get this. But the children that you are raising have been in survival so much that education matters very little to them because they are in survival. So if you want to emphasize school, start first by emphasizing and focusing on the relationship. Help the child to feel safe and loved and secure at home. When the child feels safe and loved and secure at home, then they can go to school and they can figure that out. But if I'm stressed out at home, if I've had 5 placements or 10 placements or 15 placements, and I'm don't even know if I'm going to see my bed again. I don't know if I'm going to see that person who's been being my mommy and daddy anymore. See, it's a survival thing. It's a survival thing. And so you've got to focus on the relationship first. And once a child feels secure, and this is what's hard, is because schools don't realize either that if a child is in survival, they can't learn. We all should be focused on helping children feel regulated, helping them feel safe, helping them feel secure first. Because a regulated brain is a brain that can learn. So build a relationship, calm the child down, help the child feel safe. One of the things you can do in school, this is a real quick, easy thing you can do. For your kids who struggle in school, call them mid-morning. Call them mid-morning. And I'm going to tell you, some of you, the first thing you'll say, the school won't let me talk to my kid. Oh, I hear that so often. Ain't no school going to keep you from talking to your kid. Then it's not. It's your kid. Call your kid mid-morning and just say, hey, I love you. I look forward to seeing you after school today. And that one little thing resets their brain to know that they've got a home when they get out of school. Focus on relationship first. Anyone else?
I've had 11 surgeries in the last 10 years. Most recent, the last year and a half, I've had fusion on my neck, lower back, both hips replaced. Every day is a constant struggle with chronic pain, as well as nerve pain for the rest of my life. And it's truly difficult to live day by day, but as well as be that factor that my children need in their life, to give them the structure and the foundations that they need. But as well as I'm having a hard time working on my own self, and until I'm able to work on my own self first, that's when I can release that love that they need. It's very, very, very hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's extremely difficult. You just making that comment?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a great point. He's in chronic pain. And that's one of the things that I mentioned as common traumatic events, is being in chronic pain. When you're in chronic pain, your amygdala is constantly releasing cortisol. Your oxytocin is turned off. And so the vibration becomes a stressful vibration. And it's very difficult to parent effectively when you are in a state of chronic pain. And what I just say to that, sir, is give yourself grace. You just do the best you can. You don't have to do everything. You can sit in your chair, get your favorite chair. You sit in your favorite chair and let your kids come to you. You say to each of them, we got 5 minutes of daddy time. Daddy doesn't feel good, so y'all come to daddy. And let them come to you, and you just love on them and talk to them, and then send them on their way. Like, just go, okay, time to go, 5 minutes up, time to go. That 5 minutes will make a big difference, okay?
I had a question, partially.
Last two.
I wanted your opinion specifically because you are an adoptee. You hear a lot of adoptees speak about their adoption experiences. Do you feel that the primal connection to the birth parents is the main reason for adoptees struggling so hard, or is it more so the adoptive parents' reaction to the pre-birth trauma and such?
Do I feel that the adopted child's?
When an adopted child, I've spoken to a lot of adoptive adults, and a lot of them speak of their adoptions as really negative experiences. Do you feel that that is more because adoptive parents aren't building the relationships in the way that they should, or do you feel that it's more just the primal loss of the biological family?
It's a combination. So adopted children at a foundation have the loss of the biological family, which is usually stored internally as I'm not good enough, and I'm going to be abandoned, that level of sensitivity. And then they move into adoptive placements, not all children, but they move into adoptive placements where the parents don't really understand them. And that was really my experience. It wasn't so much my experience as it was my sister's experience. I love they're my parents, you know. My dad's passed away now. And I always grew up feeling very secure. So I don't have that framework that a lot of adult adoptees have, that adoption was a bad experience for them. Adoption was the best thing that ever happened in my life. My sister would have disagreed. And it's fundamentally because not only did she was killed in a car wreck too, not only did she have that loss from her biological family, but she and my mom and dad, they never connected. It was always tumultuous. It was always stressful. And my mom said, shortly after my sister passed away, that the one thing that my sister needed that she never got was understanding. They just never understood.
One thing that I'm noticing, a few of the more serious cases I have, is that there's such complex trauma that it causes what you said, the dysregulation, where at that point it leads to a lack of self, the short-term memory loss, and dissociative symptoms. Have you ever kind of seen how your program or ever helps with children who've been through so much severe trauma? I'm talking towards the end of physical abuse, where they're disconnected from themselves. Have you seen that have an effect for those who don't have the memories or don't have it? They just have the, as you call it, the blueprints or the behaviors and not the memories attached because of the abuse.
So for children who have been through such extreme trauma that they become dissociative in nature, the reason that they don't have an opportunity to heal and show up and be present to that pain is because there's so much stress that continues to show up around them. So the stress that shows up around them may not be the same kind of stress that caused them to dissociate, but it's enough stress to keep them in a place that they're trying to survive all the time. So they never really get to work through that pain. And so in my experience, when I can help parents understand themselves so they don't get so overwhelmed by the child's shutdown and go away or behavior, then they can start to understand their child in a way that when the child is in that dissociative place, they can stay present. And when they can stay present over time and through lots of repetition, the child can start working through. See, here's the thing about severe behavior that a lot of times we don't understand. When your child is misbehaving, they're actually giving you an inroad to their trauma. It is in the midst of severe behavior that you have the best opportunity to help the child heal. You see, because we try so hard to suppress the behavior, we keep shutting off the brainstem. But when the child's misbehaving, their brainstem, when the child gets so stressed that it starts driving their negative behavior, their brainstem opens up. That's where the healing has to take place. So the healing has to take place in the moment of the behavior. And the way it happens is through your presence, through your responses, through your attention, through your own feelings when they're in that, when it's wide open. You don't have to go down and do anything magical. The magic is being able to be present and not get overwhelmed and provide a little bit of oxytocin in the midst of all that fear and pain. And so when you can do that, slowly but surely, children start to heal, the brain starts to integrate and rework, and they start to become more present. They don't have to go away anymore. And so I've done that with kids as well as adults. Yes. Okay, you guys enjoy lunch.